Okay, so we're going to get started. So when we're looking at learning and memory, this is really important for especially certain populations that you may work with, such as dementia patients. But the interesting piece about this is that I'm going to tell you what happens in normal aging versus when there's a problem. Because the DSM-5 now really is sensitive to, and I could send you that PowerPoint as well if you want it, from when I did a presentation in Italy on it. But the neurocognitive section in the DSM-5 is very sensitive. So a lot of people who have busy life syndrome and things like that can look like they have a neurocognitive disorder. And so you have that presentation, right? Yeah. So when we're looking at this, a lot has shifted since DSM-4. So a lot of these tests are based on DSM-4. So we're going to see a lot of changes within them, but they're still good, even though they're built on DSM-4, because I'm going to tell you what each question is looking for, right, on the mini mental status exam. So when we're looking at memory, the first thing I want to start off with is, if I can get my thing to work. I think I took it out. No, it's there. It was working before. Is the stages of memory. So when you're looking at stages, and this should be, if you see 1 and then A, it should be A, B, C, because it's all concepts underneath sensory. It says A, but anyway, so the first stage of memory, there's 3 stages. The first stage of memory is sensory memory. So how I want you to remember this is senses. So things come in via your vision, via your hearing, right? So sensory memory is where you actually take something in, say visually or auditorily, and you transform that into or you take in information and then you transform it into a visual or auditory image. So sensory is the first stage of memory. It has to come from somewhere, and it's where we transform and store sensory input into a visual auditory image. So one version of memory that you may see that is part of sensory, iconic memory. So how I want you to remember that is an icon on your computer. It's a snapshot of what the program or whatever the icon is a snapshot of what that program is, right? So if you see iTunes on your desktop and you look at iTunes and you're like, okay, that visual icon or for iconic memory is going to tell you that within that iTunes picture is music. So whereas echoic, I want you to think of echo. You hear echoes. So echo is going to be auditory. Now, iconic memory is visual. It usually lasts about a half a second because sensory memory doesn't last long at all. So about a half a second. Echoic memory lasts approximately 4 seconds. So these are 2 pieces of sensory memory. So I may say on a quiz, iconic memory, it lasts approximately how long and it's related to what? Visual, auditory, right? And I may do the same for echoic. So those 2 are part of sensory. Selective attention is a concept, especially when it comes to sensory memory. But what this concept is, if you've ever been working on something, so say you're working on something, or say I'm having a conversation with Raju, and we're having a conversation, and somebody is out in the hallway, and Rajana hears her name. She may be looking at me going, but she has selectively attended to the person outside. So what is she going to remember? What's outside, because that's what she's attending to. So some people can multitask, some can't. And a lot of that has to do with this part of, or this theory of selective attention, which means you're only going to remember what you pay attention to. It has to be this conscious thing. Now, with sensory memory, again, it's stage 1, because I'm going to talk about something different that goes in phases, but it's not stages, okay? So what's stage 2? Stage 2 is called short-term memory. This only lasts approximately 30 seconds. Now, on this PowerPoint, it says minutes. Please disregard minutes. So cross out minutes, or you don't have it in front of you, but just write 30 seconds, because it's not 30 minutes. It's very short. So short-term memory only lasts approximately 30 seconds. Now, when thinking about this, there's 2 pieces or 2 components of short-term memory that you want to be aware of. The first one is called primary memory. So if I say to David, okay, David, I want you to remember these numbers, 5, 2, 3, 4, 8. Repeat them back to me.
5, 2, 3, 4, 8.
Good. So what that is primary memory. Now, if I say to David, okay, I want you to repeat them backwards to me.
8, 2, 3, 5.
4, 5, right? But that's hard.
Yes.
It's hard because you really have to pay attention, right? Now, he paid attention, but he's also distracted because he's writing his notes. So what manipulating is working memory. So if I say, okay, now repeat what I just gave you backwards, that is working memory. Primary memory, again, it's no manipulation. So it's just remember these things in this, as I say it. Working memory would be if I say, okay, say it backwards. That's manipulated. What do you think goes in natural aging? Primary or working? Working, yes. So if you give tasks to somebody that is older, and it's in an order, they can usually remember that. It's when it goes out of order or they have to really work for it. That's how I have you remember working memory. Or you manipulate it where they have difficulties. So a lot of problems with elderly patients or dementia patients, depending on what stage they're at, can really be fixed by the way that you ask the questions. It's kind of like when I showed you the video clip on Wernicke's. Huh? Yes, right? And so and I had said, or let's think of Broca's aphasia, when I had said, okay, what changed that he was able to process and kind of speak a little bit easier? And it was that he went from open-ended questions to closed-ended questions, right? Yes or no. We can make their lives more simple if we understand what's going on. So if we give them like lists and stuff like that, and it's in order, they're usually good about it. It's this part in aging as well as dementia and all of that is a deficit. So primary memory and working memory are part of short-term memory. So if I say on a quiz, primary memory and working memory, or I ask a person to repeat letters backwards, which memory is that a part of, you would say working. If I say you are administering a working memory test, what are you trying to access and look at? Short-term memory, okay? Short-term memory can hold approximately 5 to 9 items. So what we normally say in the field is 7 plus or minus 2. But because that's confusing, I just say 5 to 9. So this is how telephone numbers came out with 7 digits, right? Now it's up to 9 because you add area codes or whatever, but that was within a frame that we knew people could understand and remember their phone numbers. Birth dates we have, that's easy, pretty easy for people to remember. And we'll talk about how they memorize stuff, but short-term memory in general can hold 5 to 9 items. Any more than that, it's going to be difficult. So again, social security numbers were developed on this, phone numbers, like there's a lot of systematic stuff that was developed on this. Now, it was funny because when I was doing the Spartan, they had this part, probably about 2.5 miles into it, probably halfway there was a memory test. And of course I'm thinking, all right, I see what they're doing. So they have this board, and it has, so the digits on your head for whatever your runner number is, the last 2 digits are linked to a specific like code that you have to remember. And so what they did is they called it a memory test. And so what they did, you had to remember that code specific to your headband, finish the race, and then at the end tell them. Because they were checking your memory. If not, you had to do 30 burpees. So I remember when I was watching this, I'm like, this is cool because I know exactly what they're doing in the process by which. And so I used chunking, which isn't throwing up, but I used chunking as a way to remember this. Chunking is when you take digits and so say I had to remember 19427582. I would do what's called chunking and make it into separate pieces that are meaningful. So on that one, let me see if I can remember. It was hotel. Oh, I think I forgot it. 44213. 4431213. So what I had to do is I had to break it up into, what I did is I looked at that and I said, all right, how can I make this meaningful? So in this one, if this was a 41, but we'll hypothetically say it's a 40, we'll see it as 42. If I had to remember this string, I'd say my dad was born in 1942, which he was 41, but 42, / I was born in 75, / 82 was the year some song came out. That's chunking. Has anybody ever done that? Yes. It's very helpful, right? So people can do this with numbers, they can do it with items, they can do it with a lot of things, but chunking is what we use so that we can transform a memory from short term into long term. Now, what happens, and I'll tell you in a minute, is after we go from sensory, which is only like 4 seconds, into short-term memory, which is 30 seconds, Now into long-term memory. Long-term memory has no limitation in space, size, space of what it can handle overall. The problem is that you don't want to remember everything. Your brain will go on overload. There's many things that happen. You'll get confused, like so much can happen. So with long-term memory, we're going to talk about why you don't want to remember everything and how it chooses what gets consolidated in long-term memory. So there's two components that I want you to remember relating to long-term memory that are important. One is recent memory. Recent memory is usually the past 2 weeks or so. Remote memory is after that and could be 2+ years. So, what do you think at a recent memory and remote memory, what do you think or believe decreases in time? Like as you age, what tends to go away? I've heard both. Recent, why? Why do you think it's recent?
It's not ingrained
Yes. So it's not ingrained. There's multiple reasons why, but it's not crystalline. It's not like to where it's been rehearsed over and over and over again. There's also other theories, but for now, just know that. Remote stays intact because usually it's things that happened over and over, so you've like rehearsed it, or it could be that it's meaningful. There's so many different things that we're going to talk about regarding how this works, but I want you to know that recent memory usually declines in elderly as people age, as well as in dementia, whereas remote tends to stay intact. Now, eidetic memory is cool. That's what's known as photographic memory. This is where people can actually look at things and kind of take a snapshot and go back and know where it is or what it is. Now, everybody has a degree to it, especially if you're a visual learner. So an example happened today with Alice. Do you know something that I was working on that we talked about that may have displayed this? What did we work on together today?
Nothing on schedule?
Yes?
Okay.
She was burnt out. So she was on my work computer working on the schedule for summer, and I didn't see my computer, and I had my personal one in front of me that didn't have the schedule on it. But I looked back and I was telling her where to add something. And I said, if you go to the top of this page, you'll see it right there. And then I said, okay, go up again, and I kind of directed her to where it was. Now, there's a whole bunch of courses just listed. But because I had gone over and over with it, and partially also this piece that I tend to have in being a visual learner, I could actually see the spreadsheet in my head. So, but some people can actually like, boom, they have it. And it's rare, but they do have it to where they can remember, like, if you ever watch, what was that show? Not Law and Order. Criminal Minds, right? And so the one kid has this memory.
Oh, Reed?
Huh?
Reed?
Read, yes. So when we are looking at the stages of memory, I want you to remember that You have sensory, short-term, long-term. Now, what happens is, are things that you bring to short-term is where you can manipulate it, right? Because that's where working memory is kind of hanging out. So that's where you can manipulate. Now, when we remember things, we don't directly access it in long-term memory. What we do is we take it from long-term memory, bring it back to short-term memory. We look at that and say, oh yeah, this is what happens, and then we put it back into long-term memory. So there's two pieces here that are important to know. One, short-term memory, if we manipulate there and we bring back something from long-term memory that we're remembering into short-term memory, this is how things change with your memories. Because you now are remembering the last time you remembered it. And if you had it in working memory and you manipulated it, whether it was somebody telling you that, no, that's not how it happened this way, and then you then send it back to long-term memory that way, you're only going to remember the last time that you remembered it. It doesn't go back to your early, like, you're not time traveling back to the 80s. Like, you're just pulling the last time you remembered it. So that's how things get manipulated because of that, right? So we bring it back, we play with it in short-term memory again, working can manipulate it, and then we send it back to long-term. There's one issue. So those two big pieces, the fact that we access it, pull it back from long-term into short-term, is one piece. The second piece is the manipulation. Yes?
This made me think of an example that my husband's grandmother passed away this year. But before she passed away, she had severe dementia. Never diagnosed as Alzheimer's or anything, but just dementia. And she always asked, even after we got married, when's the wedding, because she was remembering the last memory that she could create essentially in store was that we were engaged.
Yes.
And not that she was at the wedding.
Yes.
But she was always asking. That was the memory, was that we were engaged.
Yep.
It was sad, but very interesting.
It is sad. Yeah, it is. It's exactly that. That's a good example. I give the one of my dad. He was the next to last born, and the first child had his same name, who would have been like, I don't know, 15 years older than him, died. And so when my grandmother was dying, she said his name, where is he? And he's like, I'm right here. And then she was like, no, you died. And so she was remembering the other one, who died at like age, how old was he? Was he 2 or 2 months? I don't remember. But yeah, it's interesting where where it'll cut off, kind of. Yeah.
So what do we really remember if every time it's like remembering again and maybe we don't really have memory?
And that's the controversies. Do you really remember? Because I'm going to talk about a concept in which we fill in the blanks sometimes, because we can't remember something, so unconsciously we fill in the blanks, and that becomes the new memory, which may not have happened, and that's what they find in hypnosis. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so remember how I said the stages of memory are, actually, you know what? It's 10 till 7. We end at 7:30 and go into our next class. Let's do this. Let's take a 10-minute break now, come back at 7, and then we will move into classifications of memory. So I am going to...
This will keep running, however, I'm going to mute it so everyone doesn't hear everyone's conversation.
Okay, welcome back. So I had talked about the stages of memory, and I said I'm going to talk later about something else, and I don't want you to get them confused, but this is the something else, which is the classification of memory. Okay, so stages is how does it flow to get encoded essentially. The classification is how are they classified. So the first thing that you want to know about is what's called declarative memory. And declarative memory is also known as explicit memory. So you want to know both of those terms because I can ask a question and ask for explicit. I can ask a question and ask for declarative. So you want to know those. Declarative memory or explicit memory is a conscious recollection of information. So these are things like, there's two parts to it. One, you could look at, which is semantic memory. Semantics are like the meaning of things, right? So one part of declarative being semantic would be facts, words, how things are related. There's 365 days in a year, 8 hours in a workday for most people, unless you're a nurse. Right? There's 7 days in a week. Everything that is facts or meaning, how things are constructed, that would be semantic. The second part is called episodic memory. This is autobiographical information. Now, there's one that you may get confused with when I talk about later. So just know that within declarative memory, which is also known as explicit, it's a conscious recollection of information. You're consciously like pulling it up. The first part is semantics. The second is episodic. And you can think of it as like episodes of your life. So if I say, okay, what did you eat for dinner last night? Or what did you have for breakfast this morning? Or tell me about your 21st birthday, or tell me about when you graduated high school. What was that like? What was the autobiographical information? That would be episodic. Think of it as an episode of, I don't know, your favorite TV show. They go in episodes, right? So I'm looking for a specific episode. I will tell you what this is often confused with later. Which one of these do you think declines in aging?
Oh, behavior.
Yes. So you said that by saying, what did you eat for dinner last night? Episodic memory. And the reason being is one of the same reasons as recent and remote. But even within that, because 21st birthday could be like 50 years ago, this is a piece that people tend to miss when you ask them things like, what did you have for breakfast? Tell me a little bit about like what happened specifically on this specific event day. And they can't. They have a difficult time. It kind of fades over time, and we'll talk about that. But this one tends to kind of decline a bit. Now, this is the first classification of memory. Does everybody have this? The second classification of memory is what's called procedural memory. So a procedure is anything like you are going to do in order to do something, so you can remember it that way. Procedural is also known as non-declarative and implicit. Now, what procedural memory is are a recollection of abilities, skills, procedures without conscious awareness. Okay? So, if the phone rings and I just pick it up, that's procedural memory. I know to pick it up and press a certain button or whatever. I'm not thinking about it. It's unconscious. I'm not going, okay, Step 1, I'm going to walk to my phone. Step 2, I'm going to pick up said phone, right? It just happens. It's like that saying that you'll hear, oh, it's like riding a bike. You just get back on it and go. Because that also is a procedural. Anything you've done that requires like some sort of procedure, how to turn on the TV, how to program, I don't know, an app on your phone, how to, there's so many different things, how to use a fax machine. Some people just walk up to the fax, boop, 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 right, because they know how to do it. So it's without conscious awareness. So again, declarative is going to be your explicit memory, right? And it's going to have semantic and episodic. Semantic, you're going to remember facts, meaning, whereas episodic is going to be autobiographical information, right? Tell me about your 21st birthday. Tell me when you got married. Tell me all of that. Now, what are some concepts that I want you to know about that are related to memory? The first concept is called retrieval. So when we say like, oh, can you remember? What we're asking is, can you retrieve it? And so retrieval is the process of you actually accessing the information, bringing the long-term memory into short-term memory. So retrieval is the process of accessing information from long-term memory to short-term memory. Now there's two types of retrieval processes. There's recognition. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was asking, was this under procedural?
No, this is new. This is concepts related to memory. So retrieval, or with retrieval, there's two parts. There's recognition and there's recall. So I give you recognition tests every week. Those are multiple choice, right? Because there's some sort of cue involved. Whereas recall would be if I gave you an essay question and said something like, tell me a little bit about how long-term potentiation works. That would be recall, because you have no cues there. You have to pull it directly and put it onto paper. So which one do you think goes in aging? Recall, yeah. So if you give older individuals or elderly or whatever recognition tasks, they'll remember. They'll be able to answer the questions. If you have them recall it, it's going to be a lot difficult. Priming. Priming is a term that is used in multiple arenas, but in relationship to memory, it's a cue to allow for someone to remember. So sometimes if I ask you a question, I may prime you. So I may say, I don't know, which lobe is responsible or holds the primary visual cortex? And you guys may not remember, and I may say it starts with an O. Oh, occipital. That's priming. I'm cueing you to remember something or to figure something out. Now this is cool because this happens all the time. The Zeigarnik effect. I love this because if you ever are trying to remember something and then so it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're having a conversation and you're like, oh my God, I can't think of that actor's name. And then 1 o'clock in the morning you wake up and it's like, ping, there's the name. How that works is, it's called the Zeigarnik effect. How that works is your mind, your brain is working unconsciously to remember. So you're not consciously like trying to remember this actor from 1 p.m. to like 1 a.m. Your brain is continuing to work to remember it while you go on with your life. So sometimes it's going like a computer, and ding, there it is, either in your dream or when you wake up, or you're in the shower, whatever it could be, and there it is.
Never when you actually need the information.
Exactly. So Zeigarnik effect, the brain continues to work unconsciously until one remembers. And for example, I put waking up at 2 a.m. recalling something. So these are 3 concepts so far. Does this make sense? Yes.
I don't understand the difference between recognition and priming.
Recognition, so recognition would be that there are already cues there to retrieval. Priming would be me giving you a cue to help you remember something. So we prime in order, or you may even do it. So you may say, okay, I'm trying to recall the name of so-and-so. So then you prime yourself by going, okay, A, B, C, oh, Charlie. So priming is a technique to help you remember. Recognition or tasks to where I may say like multiple choice. I'm giving you a cue in that task.
So recognition would be the cue exists already, but then priming is more like a procedure that we go through to be able to remember.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's kind of like prompting. Like where you're like, okay, this is where you're supposed to do that. Okay. So, red integration. Have you ever had an experience where and it usually happens with a smell, where you smell something and all of a sudden all these memories come back? So it may be a flower, or may be something, and all of a sudden you're back and you're like, oh my God, this smell reminds me of when I used to cook in my grandma's kitchen, and then you're now thinking about grandma's kitchen and all these other memories come up. That is called red integration. So what it is a stimulus rapidly unlocks a chain of memories. So a smell from childhood, for example. You could be visually looking at certain things and all of a sudden, boom, it pops in and now you're remembering everything, and that memory leads to that memory and leads to that memory. And all of these unlock a chain of memories. Landmark events is what we utilize to recall information. It's a way that we recall information. So you've probably done this before, but if you're trying to remember, say, wait, what year was it that I went to Italy for the first time? Let's see, I graduated with my master's in this year, but it wasn't that. It was before my doctorate in this year, so it was somewhere between that. Oh, yeah, that's right. You're using events to recall information as landmarks. So you're trying to, another one that happens is when people say, how old were you again when you had your second child or something like that? And they may use, let's see, my first one was born here. I just had graduated college, but then it was before that year. So, oh yeah, that's the year. Or that's how old I was. So it's a way that people recall information by using these landmark events. Now, oftentimes when I ask people things like, tell me about the 9/11,
what were you doing? People will say, oh my God, I was in Mrs. So-and-so's class and I was sitting at the second seat from the last, and they remember very, very vivid memories of what they were doing, what they were wearing. It could be so many different things, where they were standing in a room, all of that. That is called the flashbulb memory. So how I tell people to remember flashbulb memory is think of a camera, like those old school cameras with the flash on it. It's like, okay? What it's doing is you have this snapshot in your head of exactly what was going on in that moment. Most of the time, it's like a not good event. It could be a good event, but for the most part, it's often related to like a traumatic event or something not pleasant. So somebody may say, like I gave the 9/11 example, or tell me when the first person landed on the moon, what was going on, or when Princess Diana died, or whatever, depending on your age and stuff like that. And people will recall those details. So it's almost as if you have a snapshot picture, which is different than iconic. This is, you're actually remembering that day or that experience in detail, very vividly. Prospective memory. This is remembering that you have something planned for the day. So if you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, I have to go to the doctor today, I have to go to work after that, I have a biobases test, whatever, that's your prospective memory. Prospective memory declines in aging. This is why individuals forget that they have appointments, especially dementia, but even older individuals, if they don't write it down or they don't set reminders or they don't do that, they can easily forget that they had something planned that day. That is perspective. So we talked about memory and kind of the concepts. Now I want to talk about forgetting and why people forget. So Ebbinghaus was one of the first researchers to study forgetting. And what he came up with is called the serial position effect. So, and I've been back in the day in undergrad, I remember participating in studies where they did this. And if I take a list of words, so if I said to you guys, okay, I want you to give me a list of grocery items. So just give me some items. Somebody's got to go shopping. What else? What else? Yogurt. Salad.
Bananas.
Bananas. All right. Now I tell you right away, because this is right away, tell me what was on that list. Okay. So what tends to happen on word lists, when we look at the serial position effect, people tend to remember words at the beginning and the end of the list better than in the middle on immediate recall. So if you've ever written a list for groceries and then you go to the store and you forget the list, oftentimes people will remember, well, that would be delayed recall. So say, for example, I leave the list in the house
and I'm like, okay, it was right away, I need to write it real quick because I don't want to go back in, I'll remember the things at the beginning and the end of the list equally and the middle last. This is going to relate to studying because I'm going to show you how this works with studying and learning. However, on delayed recall, so there's some time that that goes by between that, people will remember words at the beginning of the list better than the middle and the end. So if I drive to the grocery store and I go, okay, what was on my list? I'll probably remember eggs, milk, bread. More likely than the middle and the end of the list. So, thinking about, because we're running out of time, so we're going to wind up having to do the mini mental status exam next time and kind of extending that. But when we're thinking about this, I want to give you a couple scenarios to run through. If I gave you a list and immediately said, okay, what is on this list? So, like I did, so eggs, milk, bread, duck with cheese, yogurt, salad, chocolate, bananas, and I cover it and I say, tell me what was on that list. And you start to tell me, what memory are you going into? Okay, short term. What specifically in it, within short term? Primary, good, right? So that's primary. If I say, tell me the list backwards, now what? Working, good. Because that's manipulating, right? So what happens in this process, there's different theories as to why people forget. We will talk about that next time, but I want you to know the serial position effect that says people remember on immediate recall, so right after, people will remember the beginning and the end of the list best, and then the middle. And then on delayed recall, people will remember the beginning of the list better than the middle of the end. Now, how does this pertain to studying? So, and I know this because I used to do this too. So if I have my snow cards, it's really great to remember them in order. That's primary memory. But if I mix them up, no, don't do that. That's the best way to learn because it's working memory. Now, think of sometimes there's things that may interfere. And we're going to talk about that next time, but there's things that may interfere that will prevent you from remembering certain things. But always remember in the order that you can because that helps. But then know it backwards and then mix them up. And you will remember if you can do that, you have the info. Because it's about that manipulation piece. All right, what do you study? Or what are you going to read? You're going to read everything, of course. But what do I want you to focus on for the intents and purposes of the quiz? I want you to, it's going to be chapter 11. I want you to know in 11.1, the case of KC, the man who cannot time travel. So just write down 11.1, case of KC. 11.2, I want you to know about Korsakoff syndrome. 11.4, I want you to know that section, the whole section. 11.6, I want you to know about Jennifer Aniston neurons. That's awesome. 11.7, I want you to know all of that section. And it sounds like a lot, but it's not.
11.8, I want you to know about long-term potentiation, and I'm going to talk about that next time, but I want you to know about that. And 11.9 all. So 11.1, case of KC, man who cannot time travel. 11.2, Korsakoff syndrome. 11.4, all of it. 11.6, Jennifer Aniston's neurons. 11.7, all of it. 11.8, long-term potentiation, and 11.9, all. I'm going to pass out the mini mental status exam now, only because I want you to bring this with you next time, okay? So take one and pass them out, and we will talk about this next time. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay.
We'll remember later.
Yeah, I hope you remember this memory lecture.